Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, bringing you today a bit of an update to my Lunalight Time Thief build, as well as just a general discussion of how I believe Lunalight builds are shaping up as of this current format, before Duo Overload, and how things will change after the set drops. So I think that this deck is in a pretty interesting state, which I'll delve into a bit as we get into things, but I think that actually for the foreseeable future, this will probably be the last time I update this specific variant of Lunalights. There are a lot of good characteristics of this deck, but a lot of problems that come with it as far as just the way that the meta is currently trending. And I think that just with the way that especially Duo Overload impacts the format, I think that the Time Thief cards are not really going to be sufficient for basically handling what the meta is trying to put up with. But I think that once we do get, the cards like Y-Strix and Union Carrier and everything else that we can play around with, it'll be a lot easier to keep up with the power level of those decks while also just maintaining the consistency that I think this deck really does appreciate. And I think that it will fundamentally change the focus of the deck enough to the point where I think that the Time Thief cards will kind of just fade out as far as being the optimal strategy, in my opinion. So we're just going to have to wait and see. But overall, I think this will be my last rundown of the Lunalight Time Thief deck profile, at least for now. This is actually the deck profile that I have been using on Dueling Book Rated in particular to get to 1000 Dueling Book rating, and that's a bit of a spoiler because if you guys haven't seen the community posts that I've been putting up, I did actually manage to get there. I am definitely behind on actually uploading the videos themselves and recording the footage and whatnot, but I promise I will be getting to that as soon as I can. Expect to see a lot of uploads in your sub box in a couple of in the upcoming days and weeks. But yeah, without further ado, let's just go ahead and talk about things as far as the deck profile and how I think the deck in general performs in context of the format. So first off, for the Lunalight names, we got the standard 10, because I'm considering Zephyros obviously, so we got 3 Chick, 3 Tiger, 2 Yellow Martin, 1 Bird, and the 1 honorary Lunalight Zephyros. So nothing too much to say here. This is the standard lineup that has been the same for honestly, ever since I picked up the deck. I only really ever deviated this a little bit. I used to play 2 of this at the very start, and then I think I trimmed it down to 1 very quickly. But yeah, I've had this ratio, and it's not changed at all. It hasn't changed in any one of my builds. Next up, we got the Dangers. I played a lot of them, so 1 Nessie, 2 Jackalope, 2 Tsuchinoko, and 2 Mothman. So the problem with this build is that the way it is designed to be consistent is to be able to just play its hands of Chick Tiger every game, but Chick Tiger by itself isn't enough. So you would ideally want to incorporate Zephyros into your combo strings, but in order to do that, you either have to open a way to discard Zephyros, like say Perfume or Goods or something, or you would have to find a way into Curious to be able to send the Zephyros directly, or send, the Affirmation Perfume after you search the Zephyros off Vorstrix. So you really bottleneck yourself into Curious a lot. And I think that while that play worked a lot previously, I think it's a lot more vulnerable now, because people kind of just know that choke point is really high investment. So Dangers kind of promote the strategy of just going into Curious a lot, but I think that there's not really any other alternative for this deck. You could play Souls and you can play other cards, but I don't really think that the type of extender that you play really makes a difference in that regard. You're going to, in any case, just be trying to go for Curious a lot of the time in this kind of a build, and I think that's one of the big flaws, is just that it creates kind of just this big loophole that your opponents can capitalize on. And unlike the upcoming builds with Y-Strix and whatnot, you don't really have a recovery point, whereas there are choke points in the Y-Strix build as well, obviously, namesake of it. Y-Strix is a choke point, but there are ways that you can actually mitigate that, get around it, or just play past that. Whereas if your Curious gets interrupted, then you kind of just run out of gas, and that's really unfortunate. So I think while the Dangers are really good at what they do, I think what they do isn't necessarily the best way to approach the format, because what a lot of people are doing right now is they're kind of going very heavy on board breakers, or they'll be very heavy on interruptions, during your turn, based on like the deck that you're playing against, of course. So like there are certain games where you'll find yourself just running into like 2, 3, 4 different hand traps. Well, 4 is maybe a bit much, but like 2 or 3 different hand traps. And like when your play is so telegraphed to the point where you're like trying to make curious a lot, then it really, really hinders, the ability for you to pivot and adapt and all those things that I really enjoy about playing the deck, which I think that in past builds, it was okay because you had not only Curious, but you had things like Rusty or things like Mermaid to go into should like Curious line fail. But now you don't really have like a backup option. And I think that's like the biggest problem that the deck has had ever since, the Orcus line of play really just got axed. So that's kind of like one of the biggest things that has really not deterred me from playing the deck, but got me like to reconsider exactly how powerful the deck was, because the ceiling is still there for sure, like if you're completely uninterrupted, but it's just a matter of if you can actually get to that point. And even if you do resolve your full end board, there are still certainly ways to actually break those boards. Like those boards are actually just crackable in a lot of instances, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But yeah, so we got these dangers. Not too much fancy going on here, honestly. It's the like 5 good ones and the 2 Mothman, which I think is like fine to run at 2. And then we got 3 Winder. So yeah, obviously we're not playing Bezel Ship anymore. That card is just a brick, straight up. And if you're like doing the cool things that you wanted to do with it, such as like put it under other XCs and then like maybe detach them for like a standby phase redoer and then like bring it back with Perpetua to like get another interrupt that way, or like if you were able to get redoer and Perpetua on the board at the same time, and then like use the Bezel Ship to just get an additional rank 4 after you like get it off of redoer. Like there's cool things you can do, but it just like doesn't help facilitate starting your plays, which I think is like what you really need to focus on as far as identifying your win condition. Because if you're able to play, then like the boards that you produce, like it generally just, they don't vary that often. Like you'll maybe get an extra rank 4 with that like minor little inclusion, but it requires like very specific stars to align, if that makes sense. So I just think that foregoing that variance and just favoring consistency is kind of just the way I prefer to play the deck. And I'm kind of like approaching this as well in kind of hindsight from very preliminary testing for YCS Charlotte. But just kind of like looking back on like how this deck is like being played, I just think that it's really, really hard to kind of play the deck the way I think that ideally it would be played if we had all the options given to us, which would be, just to focus on, having the same inputs every single time and just trying to, be able to like pivot as easily if you get disrupted early in your combo and stuff. Which Winder is not really a card that facilitates that. It's really only a card that is good when you're already playing the game. So that's why it's really kind of just iffy to include this engine at all, because like Winder is a card that you want to play because it is such high impact when you do resolve it. But when you are in cases where you're struggling to get your engine going, or like even if you do have your engine but it gets interrupted, like for example like an Ash on Tanky or like a DD Crow on the Martin or things of that nature, it really becomes a lot harder to actually utilize this card. Whereas like I think other builds, both previous and potentially future builds of this deck, can play cards in place of this card that actually serve that purpose of like getting you back into the game, if that makes sense. So that's why I think like Winder is good, but it's very frustrating. So that's how I feel about this card, and that's how I feel about this engine in general. So finally, we have the Armageddon Knight, and I know I put this earlier, but I just like aesthetics, having the 3 Winder in that row and all the dangers together and everything. So yeah, it's like another normal summon, which normally you don't want to have more than 3 a lot of the time mathematically, but I think that it's needed to have as many starters as you can in a deck like this, or at least in this type of deck where again you don't really have much recovery options, so like you're just trying to get the engine rolling as fast as you can. And I think that Armageddon Knight is the not safest, but it's the only monster that like really works with the engine that can still like serve as an additional copy of Chick if you're like missing it from the start. So that's why I play it over like the whole warrior package, which Greffer is just really really bad in this kind of deck, where you struggle to sometimes get like the right moving parts of resources in the correct order, if that makes sense. So like Armageddon Knight is just a lot less conditional that you use. Whenever you draw it, you can just use it without fear of like managing specific resources. Whereas Greffer, you definitely have to take that into consideration a lot more often. So yeah, that's it for the monsters that I was playing. And then we got the spells. So we got 3 Tenki, 3 Perfume, 3 Goods, and 1 Foolish. Yeah, I think these 10 spells have also been in pretty much every Lunalight build that I've showcased. Maybe there was like 1 build or 2 that I didn't play Foolish and I played like maybe Reborn instead, but Foolish is just a lot better. Just like it's a starter that you need more of, not an extender that you don't need as many of. And then I was playing 2 Cosmic on the ladder for a while because a lot of people have been trending towards Mystic Mine, and I still honestly feel that that's kind of still very very popular as far as even like certain main deck choices. Yeah, I never want to have a deck that can't play an out to Mystic Mine, or not that any deck can't play an out to Mystic Mine, but I would never want to play a list that doesn't include an out to Mystic Mine. So yeah, that's there for that purpose. And Galaxy Cyclone is very similar. It just helps you speed up because you obviously have 3 more ways to access it. So you have effectively like 6 ways to access Mystic Mine outs, which is very very beneficial in this kind of build. And moving forward, I'm not sure if you need like the additional cyclones, because again, Galaxy is like pretty good when it is like tutorable. Just sort of depends on the kind of like direction that the meta shifts. So like this is obviously subject to change, and you can feel free to alter things depending on your meta and such. So definitely do keep that in mind. All right, so that's it for the spell cards, and then we got the traps. So I opted to run 3 Impermanence. So this is kind of a weird one, but you definitely need an out to Winda, and like there's definitely a couple other options for that. Forbidden Chalice is something that is like really really taking off in popularity, and I think that it's good, but I also just like having the versatility of having a card that is like specifically good in your opponent's turn, like turn 1. Like it's obviously not going to be enough to stop like say a full spiral combo in a lot of instances, but just having the extra interruption against like the mid-range combo decks, or even certain combo decks that have like very very specific choke points, or if you're going against like say a deck like the Mirror Match, where your opponent is very clearly putting themselves in a position to like end their turn if their Curious gets impermed or something. Like that's a very very handy thing to have there. But yeah, just some form of out to Winda is like very very advised, because this deck has this extremely hard time getting over Winda. There's like no native outs to it in the engine, unfortunately, and that will continue to be a problem moving forward, which is something I am aiming to fix. But yeah, this is my tentative like solution, quote unquote, for that. Then we got 2 Time Thief Retrograde. You'll notice the absence of Flyback in this list, and that is because that Flyback is just an entire brick if you draw it. I understand that like if you draw it, like you could attach Retrograde from deck and that's fine, but in the cases where you have access to Winder and like you kind of now have to sort of be like, oh well, I don't really want to like search the Retrograde because I need to put a trap under the Redoer, but then like is that better than just having the Retrograde itself like as a counter trap? Like some instances, like especially if it's blind game 1, like some instances that's good, some instances that can just like lose you the game. So like I'd rather hard draw it without Winder than hard draw a Flyback without Winder, because like at least this way like you're guaranteed that you still have like an actual like real disruption that like won't ever be like dead if you draw it, assuming you can get your other engine pieces online, of course. But yeah, I just felt like this card was a much higher impact and a more flexible card, and like it answers side deck cards a lot better, which is something that this deck has, or not even side deck cards, but like blowout cards like Dark Ruler or Evenly, things of that nature, things that can really just blow you out. Mystic Mine too, like these are kind of also outs to Mystic Mine going first. But yeah, like this is I feel like just better than Flyback in a lot of cases, because like even though Flyback has like the good grave disruption, of course, like it's not needed if you like build the board in such a way where that like doesn't matter, mostly involving like Dweller. So yeah, I felt like that was kind of just unnecessary. And then finally we got Serenade Dance. And I also took out the Utopia double package. That's like something that I still kind of waver back and forth on, but ultimately it comes down to extra deck space. Oh, whoa, I actually just timed out. Cool. One sec. All right, guys, so we're back here, and I was talking about the Utopia double package that I cut. So yeah, the reason I cut that is more so because of the space in the extra deck. I really just like having the room for utility there as far as just go second options for clearing board specifically, because it is interesting that, you know, a lot of the monsters in this format are kind of on the weaker side, so you can take advantage of Utopia double, but there are a lot of instances where you still have to break a board first, like because your opponent will have actual live disruption or ways to, you know, interact with you en route to you actually resolving the Utopia double for game. So I just figured that instead of, you know, having to play an engine requirement that I always seem to draw, I would rather devote those 2 slots to cards that would like consistently always allow you to actually, you know, handle whatever your opponent throws at you, whether it's like you going second or whether it's in the middle of the game, etc., etc. And it is true that like it can be harder to clear like bigger monsters, but I think overall like the deck is toolboxy enough in nature to where it can kind of handle whatever threats that might appear on the board without having to rely on like resolving Utopia double, which even though it is easy to achieve, like it's not necessarily like it's not as easy in terms of getting it through your opponent's disruptions as like, you know, it might be or it might appear to be initially. All right, so for the extra deck we got Abyss Dweller, we got Tiger King, which is like really good. We got Evil Swarm Nightmare, Light Dragon Ad Ignister, which I think is really nice. Just having an extra monster in the extra deck to allow you to clear problem monsters, specifically something like a Cerberus or this card, or even like cards that have cards like Castell and Diamond Dyer. Like those are really old cards obviously, but like those types of cards are like things that this deck actually surprisingly lacks, and I think that it's really helpful to have those, just, you know, to be able to, you know, be able to actually, you know, push past your opponent's like board and, you know, like get into a better board state and stuff. Next up we got Force Strix, of course. Then we got Perpetua and Redoer. A lot of the times like Perpetua isn't even necessary because like it's true that Perpetua attaching a trap and a Redoer to get the guaranteed disruption is nice and it's valuable, but it isn't always better than necessarily just making an alternative rank 4 like Nightmare or Dweller, which both of which are like extremely high impact, and just forgoing the Redoer spin entirely, especially if you have something like Retrograde anyway, because like the value that you get is just, you know, being able to use Redoer as kind of like a Phantom +1 every turn, with Retrograde getting another like, you know, card to be able to, you know, pair with the Redoer being like such a sticky body. But yeah, Perpetua is definitely nice, but even without like Flyback and Bezelship, but those cards definitely make her a bit stronger. So I don't think that it's like the super big focal point, but it's very nice to have, and like recurring Redoer is also pretty good. Next up we got Tornado Extender, also a, you know, utility card. Appaloosa, Borosword, Curious, which is again like the unfortunate choke point, but it is just kind of there for now because I unfortunately believe that if you are relying on just the Lunalight cards, you will actually brick a fair bit of the time if you have nothing to complement them for consistency, and a lot of the consistency complementing tools are ones that promote Curious, and this is again just a big, you know, a big red flag for your opponent, and they will always like throw things at it to stop it, which is correct, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating of a card to rely on as a crutch. So moving forward, I am in the process of attempting to try and just not rely on this card at all, which is actually possible, but I will keep you guys posted if I, you know, have any other findings on that. Next up we got Daruma Doll, which is really good. Obviously not only popping your Tigers and your Tenkies to get like, you know, extra value, but it's really nice to be able to climb into this after you use something like Tiger King or Force Strix, especially when you're going second. And it's really good because you can see I'm citing Mystic Mine, so it's a way to actually pop your own mine and pop one in the back row as you are laddering up into creating a actual board when you feel you can deal with your opponent. Next up is IP Masquerade, and this is probably like the contingency link monster is what I would call it. So like when you get Nibiru'd or when you get interrupted, like this is one of the cards that you can just have as a safety net to serve as an additional interruption. And even though like it's not the greatest thing, it is nice to just have extra utility here. And the thing is that like you'll notice that I cut the Gamma package. So I cut Gamma and I cut Driver, and I kind of just didn't focus on Lambda at all. So like when you have a Lambda and maybe like a Redo or Perpetua board, or like even if you have that in addition to like IP or a third rank 4, it's good, but all of it's pretty conditional. So like the Gamma interruption is very, very contingent on you actually being able to protect your Lambda. Like you have to view Lambda as like kind of a boss monster almost, which is like really, really weird to say for just a generic link too. But essentially, if your opponent does something like normal summon Spiral Tough, battle phase, like it's really hard for you to like, you know, you're gonna have to want to like use your Redoer on it, but then like that's just an interruption that your opponent forced out without you wanting to. Like when you're playing interruption cards, like you don't want to have to be forced to use stuff. You want to be able to like use things at your own discretion that you deem are worthwhile in terms of actually hindering your opponent. Like the whole point of interruptions is to hinder your opponent. Your opponent's not supposed to have agency in dictating what moves that you make in terms of like what to force out. So whenever your opponent has the ability to do that, that's a big leg up for them, and that's like a big, big problem. But apart from that, like it's a lot easier in a lot of cases to go for something like IP or for Appaloosa, especially Appaloosa, because like those disruptions are like virtually just guaranteed. They're a lot easier to activate, or they're a lot easier to utilize, like without having to worry about like managing certain board states. And I think that in general, like regardless of whichever type of board you put up, if you put up like this, if you put like an Appaloosa type board with like the rank 4s, or if you put like Lambda with Gamma, it's like still roughly the same number of interruptions, but like in any case, like they both have the same problems anyways, as far as losing to certain side cards without like you hard drawing Retrograde or drawing like a Winder, like losing to evenly your Dark Ruler, which I'll get into later. But like those problems will persist no matter if you play Gamma and Driver versus if you like just stick with Appaloosa. So I would rather just eliminate that variance entirely as far as, you know, drawing like potentially the Driver, or having to draw Gamma with like the rest of your combo in games 2 and 3 to play around Nibiru. Like I would rather just go into Appaloosa to be safe from Nibiru than hope that like the Gamma Lambda play sticks. And like I think the Gamma Lambda play, even like just in a vacuum by itself, like that's literally only one interruption, like just by itself it's not like enough. Whereas like even something like IP plus like Dweller is Dweller plus an interruption, which is I think better than, you know, having Redoer, which, you know, even though it's good as just a threat that you have to constantly monitor as your opponent, like it's not a guaranteed disruption. Like it doesn't contribute to your board being stronger, if that makes sense, like necessarily, like unless if you like specifically accompany it with Perpetua, in which case you have to incorporate more resources to it, which is why I was saying like this is not necessarily even like the cornerstone of how I want to approach the deck anymore. But again, like that's kind of just the whole crux of playing Time Thief, is that like it kind of takes away from the fact that you're able to like build boards flexibly, because like so many of the things that you would be going for, like the Gamma play plus the Redoer play, those all demand individual attention, and it kind of like takes away from just the fluidity of the way that the deck normally operates, in my opinion. So that was a long-winded way of me saying that it's easier to just play like other ways, you know, or like it's a lot easier to play the deck in like other ways, especially when Dual Overlord drops, which is like an entirely different story. But anyways, even for this format, I think there's still like better ways than to focus on Gamma Lambda personally. So yeah, we got Phoenix and Unicorn for the last Link monsters, and then for the side deck, we got 3 Nibiru, 3 Dark Ruler, 3 Mystic Mine, 2 Twin Twister, 3 Evenly, and 1 Red Reboot. So we can talk about this a little bit as far as, you know, context of the format. So I think that hand traps really are just not very good right now, as far as like if your intent in playing them is like just to stop combo decks. It's really, really hard to, because like combo decks right now are either just mid-range to the point where they don't really care about getting interrupted, or they're just able to push past them anyway and like not like really care. So like that's one of the reasons why I've really stopped liking Droll a lot. Like Droll has the problem of like not really complementing the other cards in the side deck really well, because like when you Droll your opponent, like these other cards that you draw become useless, and like you're not gonna just side in Droll because that's not enough. Like you want to side other cards to be sure that you have an answer to their board. But like in the event where you like draw Droll plus any of these, then like it becomes just like a big conflict. Hey guys, just gonna insert a little bit of a modifier or clarification to this argument here. So I'm not arguing that Droll potentially conflicting with things like Ruler or Evenly or Mystic Mind should be the only reason why you don't play that card, because obviously your entire goal is to stop them one way or the other, so whatever gets the job done is sufficient. But in the case of Droll versus something like Spiral specifically, if you do end up hand trapping them in the case of Droll, they still are able to end on a board that's rather tough to crack, something like Master Plan, which is just huge, and then you'll kind of be stuck in the same position the next turn, whereas something like Dark Ruler or Evenly or Mystic Mind allows your opponent to actually commit to the board, and then you just allow yourself to be in a much better position rather than something like Droll. But I am fully aware that it's not fully correct to just say that just because there are potential minor conflicts means that there is, you shouldn't run that card if the entire objective is to allow you to play the game, if that makes sense. But yeah, just a little bit of an addendum there. Whereas like a lot of the times, if I know my opponent is like going to play around a Biru, or like I see the way that they're sequencing their combos, or like the way the deck's built, like you can like safely be like, all right, we're not even gonna side Nibiru, we're just gonna like side these cards to just go second, and just try and force out like different ways to out like Sleeper / Trigate, and then just stick a Mystic Mind or like Dark Ruler them, or like Evenly them, etc. Just clear the board. And actually, that kind of brings me to a card that I did play for a while, which was Exciton Knight. And you can definitely play Exciton Knight in place of Light Dragon Ignister here, because it combos really well with Dark Ruler. I think that Light Dragon is a lot more consistent and safer to utilize, but at the same time, Exciton is just such high impact that it's hard to kind of exclude it. So definitely is worth taking a look at if you guys are not currently incorporating it. It's good to at least test. And then backward decks kind of are not in a good spot right now, so that's why I'm not really devoting a lot of space. I say that even though I'm like maining Cosmics, but like Cosmic has other applications, obviously against mine, but even against like I don't know, Magical Meltdown for example, or like Will of the Salamangreat, there's still like things that it can hit. But yeah, I don't think like you need to main like a lot of Spell and Trap hate specifically, but Evenly is just a good catch-all for the format currently as it stands. Just because again, like having multiples of cards to throw at your opponent going second to be able to like force disruptions, and then stick a high impact card like Mystic Mind or Evenly is just like super good. So that's why like that's kind of just the way things are for that. And now for a final kind of just briefing of the deck and why I think it's kind of struggling a little bit. It's not like struggling as far as being a bad deck by any means, but like how it kind of fares in comparison to the current format, and what I expect to possibly change or even persist going into both Dual Overload and Master Duel 5. So why I've kind of maybe shied away a little bit from the deck, at least in person, because you guys have seen me upload things like Salamangreat and Goki and Invoke Shaddoll and everything like that. I just feel like, one, again, it helps me to kind of just study the format and be a well-rounded player more, but additionally, I think that this deck just has a hard time against so many like win button type cards that other decks can play. So you got like Winda in Shaddoll Invoked, you got like Mystic Mind for a lot of decks. The Rocket Dragon Link board is actually really hard to break if your opponent like actually knows what they're doing. I know that's not like a really popular deck, but it's one that I like to respect, especially at my around me, because at my locals too, because like Shimping, who won the UDS with that deck, goes to my locals, so obviously I'm gonna have to pay attention to all the people who are playing the deck. But I said Dinos can make like VFD, like there's Mystic Mind, or maybe I didn't say that, but yeah, Dinos can make VFD, there's Winda, there's Mystic Mind, and then there's like the side cards, like the heavy going second cards, like Dark Ruler and Evenly, and like that's what the time thief cards are here for, is like try and get like a searchable answer to them, but like you don't always get that. And even still, like your opponent's going to like have so many like different answers that it's like really difficult to like just account for everything. So I don't know, I think that the boards are like extremely crackable. Like you're not guaranteed to get into the boards in the first place because of things like Nibiru and or like early Ash Blossoms or things of that nature. Like Ash on Tenki is like still like actually probably the best place to use it right now. But yeah, like even if you are guaranteed to resolve, or not, even if you do resolve your combo, which isn't guaranteed, it's not that the boards are completely uncrackable, which is like really upsetting. It doesn't matter like which ones you're ending on. Like if you're ending on Gamma, Lambda plus like 3 rank 4s, even with Retrograde, like that is still definitely breakable. And I just think that the deck is not doing anything as necessarily unfairly as other decks, like Spiral and like and whatchamacallit, like the Rocket Link deck and Shaddoll Invoked and you know, Tricking Dinosaur. Like those are, in my opinion, probably like the best decks, not in any particular order. And then you got stuff like Salamangreat and then this deck and like Geist and stuff like around tier 2 in my opinion. But yeah, like a lot of things are just not really favored for this deck as far as just going against certain like native win conditions that your opponents have that just straight up beat your entire deck's engine, because the engine itself can't out Winda and it can't out VFD. It's really difficult. So yeah, that's why I think that the deck kind of has problems. And do those get fixed by the imports like Y-Strix and everything else? Kind of. It creates like a different way for you to sort of play the combo lines. So you're able to kind of like pivot better, and I think you can build in such a way where you don't really care as much about like the blowout side cards that like I was discussing earlier. But yeah, so that's actually just gonna sum up my thoughts on this deck. I know it might sound a little bit pessimistic, but actually, contrary to what that might have implied, I am actually pretty optimistic about the future of this deck as far as post-dual overload, because I think that just the new avenue of options that the set provides for us is going to be hugely beneficial for the way that, again, we structure our sequences, play around certain hand traps, and prepare for going second cards. The floodgatey type cards like Mystic Mine and like Winda and stuff like in VFD, like those are gonna have to be accounted for on a separate accord, because the engine again itself does not inherently deal with that, sadly. But those are just problems that we're gonna have to shore up in the upcoming days, weeks, etc. So yeah, that's going to be it for this deck profile. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. This was probably another really long one, over 30 minutes I would assume. But yeah, thanks guys so much for watching this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comment section down below. Feel free to subscribe for more informative and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content. If you want to, you can follow me on Discord, Twitter, or Twitch. All 3 links in the description as always. And once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will catch you in the next video. See you guys!